This meeting is being recorded.
In order to understand the 7 trumpets as judgments still mingle with mercy, we need to take into consideration the previous number 7 that we have looked at, which are the 7 churches with the promises to the overcomers, the 7 seals, which is the settling into the truth, both spiritually and intellectually, that God's people shall not be moved, and the probation can finally close. But until then, there are 7 trumpets that follow the 7 seals in chapter 8 of Revelation. And because of the action that are still going on in the sanctuary above, it is definitely easy to prove by doing cross-reference and using the spirit of prophecy. We can prove that the 7 trumpets are not the same as the 7 plagues, as some expositors of the Bible have attempted to do. In this study of Revelation, just like we did for Daniel, we also would like to bring some present-day application. We're told that prophecy is usually understood at the time of its fulfillment. And though the same as with the seals and the trumpets, it has been proposed in the past that these have come to pass. However, it is not the belief of this study that we are presenting here that these are past. There may have been some historical application in the past. There may have been some secondary application in the past, which has to do with the prophecy does not meet all its fulfillment. Therefore, there is a primary application still to come. And this is the primary application that we take this approach in demonstrating that the 7 trumpets are still judgments mingled with mercy. The book of Revelation chapter 8 verse 3, and we read here, and we can read even verse 2, "And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And this golden altar is the golden altar of incense. And the smoke of the incense which came with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand." So obviously we are still in the holy place here, where there is a golden altar of incense and the prayers of the saints still ascending before God. So there is still activity in the sanctuary. "And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth, and there was voices and thunderings and lightning and an earthquake. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound." At this point, we remember that in the court was a continual atonement. In the holy place was the perpetual intercession. And finally, when Christ entered into the most holy place in 1844, under the prophecy of Daniel 8:14 and 9:24 to 27, this has started the final intercession and the final atonement. Therefore, in chapter 8, with the trumpet, we want to propose that the sanctuary in heaven is still open. There is still some activity in the sanctuary. It is not closed yet. Probation has not closed yet. And as we continue to study cross-referencing, I'd like to bring you to Isaiah 26 verse 9. "For when thy judgments are in the earth, the inhabitants of the world will learn righteousness," or will learn thy law. And these judgments are still mingled with mercy. When we read in Exodus 19 verse 18 to 20, it says here, "And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice." And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mount, and the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mount, and Moses went up. We read in the Spirit of Prophecy that when God gave the law, he did not summon the nation to exalt him with worldly pomp and grandeur. He commanded attention by the trumpets and thunders of Sinai. So therefore, those trumpets and thunders which are coming along with the seventh trumpet, as we see in verse 5, this is what will bring upon the earth now a series of judgments. Already his judgments are beginning to fall on some places, and soon his signal displeasure will be felt in other places. Now, the book of Revelation chapter 8 also called the trumpet woe. And according to the definition of the dictionary of 1828, the woes are conditions of deep suffering from misfortune, affliction, torturing grief, ruinous trouble, calamity, affliction, economic woes, agony, anguish, excruciation, hurt, misery, pain, rack, straits, torment, torture, travail, tribulation, distress, sorrow, anguish, regret, distress of mind. We would like to propose at this point that those seven trumpets are seven woe, which basically use the words of Matthew chapter 24, which Christ actually mentions with the sorrows and the woman in travail. And then, of course, in chapter 25, which is followed with the 10 virgins. And this is what the people of God will go through in order to be purified and in order to make ready for them to vindicate his character when the plague shall start to fall. Look at Revelation chapter 8 verse 7 now, and I read, "The first angel sounded, and they followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up." Notice the third part of the trees was burned up. This is the first woe. New research revealed that there are 3 trillion trees in the world. They said that the total numbers of trees in the world has dropped by 46%, which is almost half, since the beginning of human civilization, and particularly since the flood. In recent years, wildfire have burned up to 9 million acres of land in the United States alone. Right now, as we read this, Siberia is on fire. Extensive forest fires have become more and more common in the enormous regions lately as a result of a variety of different factors, all of which are tied to anthropogenic climate change. As the region continues warming, the forest fires are expected to become more and more common and extreme. Those forests are burning at a rate unheard of, in at least due largely to rising temperature. They contain vast reserves of carbon stored in trees and soil, and when they burn, they send that carbon into the atmosphere. That creates a dangerous cycle of more severe wildfire and ever-rising temperatures. The second angel sounded, Revelation 8, 8 and 9. And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood, and the third part of the creature which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. This is the second woe. In Revelation 8 verse 8 and 9, just like in Revelation 8 verse 7, we see that a third part. Now the third part of the trees are burned up in the first trumpet, which leaves 2/3, and now a third part of the sea becomes blood, and a third part of the fishes die. We are told that the release of oil and chemicals into our coastal waterways is a major problem. Spills can kill wildlife, destroy habitat, and contaminate critical resources in the food chains. We know too that spill can also wreak havoc on the economies of coastal communities by forcing the closure of fisheries, driving away tourists, and temporarily shutting down navigate routes. And these environmental and economic damage can linger for decades. So though people try to make believe that this has always happened, and if you read further of the effect on the wildlife, not only on the fishes, but the wildlife as well, these fish and animals right now at this point are being extinguished. We're told actually it's a new report this year, 2017, where the scientists now have declared that a third of the 27,600 species of animal is gone. Surely we can take a lesson from the time of Noah, where the fishes, and we know that the animals also suffer greatly during the flood, and we know that only a few of the animals could be preserved in the ark. Of course, the species were preserved, but not all of the animals were preserved. Many of them died. Many of them were destroyed. And though the fishes, of course, habitate the waters, I am sure there was a great change of habitat for them too, in adaptation, as it was in the time of Noah. The third angel sounded, Revelation 8, verse 10 and 11, and the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Again, we do not want to sound bringing down the bad news, but this is the third woe of the book of the Trumpets, and the third woe right now is wormwood, and the third part of the rivers and the water became bitter. I'd like to bring your attention to something very, very interesting. We are told in the book, when you look at online, and again I'm giving each time my reference, as you see the number attached, they are giving you the reference to go to in the next slide. The city name Chernobyl is the same as the Korean name for Artemisia vulgaris, which means mugwort or common wormwood, which is also Chernobyl. This is very interesting because this mugwort or common wormwood is a plant, and when you put that plant into water, it turns the water bitter. In April 26, 1986, many of us will remember the catastrophe of Chernobyl, when the nuclear plant in Chernobyl, one of their reactors actually exploded. And to this day, in 2017, though we do not hear anymore of Chernobyl, many people do not realize that that reactor was never extinguished. It is covered, but the energy that has been diffused by this explosion is still very much active. We know as well that this basic catastrophe of Chernobyl in 1986 definitely has created a lot of sicknesses, which even today we know that people have died at the time, and all those radiation that went into the atmosphere today is still definitely touching many, many people around the world. We do not know the percentage of people affected and sick today and made sick through cancer and other diseases because of this catastrophe. And this catastrophe, which is very interesting, again, Chernobyl stands for Artemisia vulgaris, which is the same as common wormwood, which is a plant, when put into water, brings bitterness, bitter water. Another catastrophe occurred on March 11, 2011, which we would like to forget, and that occurred in Japan under the nuclear explosion of Fukushima. And we are told that this will take 30 to 40 years to clean up. So when people think that this has been resolved, I have some news for you. That has not been resolved, and the scientists are at bay trying to figure out how to stop again this reactor that also exploded when there was this earthquake. And we know that this is a very, very dangerous material. Nuclear energy is even more potent than atomic energy, and so we know that it emits lots of radiation which affects the water, the Sea of Japan, which is basically the Pacific Ocean, and we know that there are a lot of radiation still detected in the ocean because of this explosion. Another catastrophe, for those of us who know Russia and know Lake Baikal, I had an opportunity to go to Russia as a missionary, and I have been to Lake Baikal in Siberia, and this is a very sad news to me. We read in the news that we can clearly say that the endemic fauna is in a state worse than ever. Earlier in Libenyanka area, we had some hopes of preserving the remains of the Baikal sponge or some forms of shellfish, but now there is no hope at all, the scientists are telling us, because of the pollution that has now taken over Lake Baikal. Lake Baikal, for your information, is the deepest lake in the world, with a maximum depth of 1,632 meters. It is also the world's largest volume of fresh water, 23,000 cubic kilometers. This means that it represents 1/5 of all the fresh water in the world, which is located here at Lake Baikal. This is again referred to you in the next slide if you want to do further study on Lake Baikal. And all of these news, my friends, especially Lake Baikal right now, and the update on Fukushima and the update on Chernobyl, it is not good news when you look at them. As I read now, Revelation 8, verse 12 and 13, the fourth trumpet, and the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, third part of the stars, so as the third part of them were darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound. So the first three woe have sounded. Number 4, the fourth angel sounding now, is a woe as well, and 3 more are to come, 5th, 6th, and 7th. Remember, woes are terrible conditions that are coming upon the earth, like a woman in travail. It's a time of tribulation and of distress and of sorrow, but this is not the time of the end yet. Now the fourth angel that sounded, a third part of the sun, the moon, and the star are smitten, and 3 more woes are to follow. We are told that immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The star will fall from the sky, and the powers of heaven will be shaken. Matthew 24:29. In Isaiah 13:10, in Ezekiel 32:7, in Joel 2, verse 10 and 31, and in Zechariah 13, verse 8 and 9, similar prophecy are given to us, and surely we need to take heed, my friend. Surely this is serious, serious business. I read from Isaiah 13:10, "For the stars of heaven and the constellation thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine." Remember, we studied the Mazzaroth. The word constellation is the same as the Mazzaroth here in Isaiah 13:10. These are related, my friend, to each other. And if we do not take heed, and if we do not look, it says, "Look up, for your salvation draweth nigh." God is trying to pass a message to us. And although it has been in the past applied as happening in around the 1790 era, these were not final application, they were secondary application, because in 1844 we know Christ entered into the most holy place. He did not come to the earth like was expected by the Millerite in those days. Therefore, those applications now become secondary application, and we are to look for primary application of the star, the moon, and the sun to be smitten as we approach the time of the end, and it's drawing closer. In Ezekiel 32, verse 7, I read, "And when I shall put thee out, I will cover the heaven and make the stars thereof dark. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon shall not give her light." These are very, very important prophecies, which though they may have had some secondary application in the past, they will be fulfilled at the very time of the end when these things come to pass. And that's what Christ says in Matthew 24. He says, "When you see these things coming to pass, look up, for your salvation draweth nigh." Go to the fifth angel that sounds the trumpet in chapter 9, verse 1 to 12. The fifth trumpet is quite long. It has 12 verses. And I will read in your hearing because it's very important. And we know that this is again a very important information, because listen to the 1/3. There is always 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And that was happening with the sun and the moon. And now with the sixth angel, you will see that there is definitely, the fifth angel, there is definitely some happening that are coming. And you might be surprised of the conclusion we draw from it, but it's all in coming up. It has not happened yet. "And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads." Please remember this. The seal of God is related to the trumpet number 5 here. So the seal could not have occurred yet per se, but when it occurs, it will bring in these trumpets with judgment of mercy, so that the people will see the power of God. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months, and their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when it strike a man. "And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle. And on their heads were as it were crowned like gold, and their faces were as the face of man. And they had hair as the hair of woman, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplate as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wing was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt man 5 months. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue as his name Apollyon. One woe is past, and behold, there come two woes more hereafter. So we know that in the third angel and the fourth angel, there were announcement of those woes, and this is the one that we're looking at right now, is definitely the fifth angel with two more woes to come. The fifth angel is very interesting because if you go to Joel chapter 2, you will see a comparison of the locust compared to a well-disciplined army. And although some people might think that those locusts, which bites like scorpions, are literally bugs, when you read carefully in chapter 2 of Joel, chapter 2 verse 3 to 11 actually, it will show you basically the same language as Revelation, which I just read here in chapter 9. And it says in chapter 2 of Joel, verse 3, a fire devoured before them, and behind them a flame burned. The land is as the Garden of Eden before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness, yea, and nothing shall escape them. The appearance of them is as the appearance of horses, and as horsemen, so shall they run. Like the noise of chariots on the tops of mountains shall they leap, like the noise of a flame of fire that devoured the stubble, as a strong people set in battle array. Before their face the people shall be much pain, all faces shall gather blackness. They shall run like mighty men, they shall climb the wall like men of war. They shall march every one on his ways, and they shall not break their ranks. Neither shall one trust another, they shall walk every one in his path, and when they fall upon the sword they shall not be wounded. They shall run to and fro in the great city, they shall run upon the wall, they shall climb up upon the houses, they shall enter in at the windows like a thief. The earth shall quake before them, the heaven shall tremble, the sun and the moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their shining, and the Lord shall utter his voice before his army, for his camp is very great. For he is strong that executeth his word, for the day of the Lord is great and very terrible, and who can abide it? Some people have proposed that this army, which is an army of locusts, which basically brings us to Revelation chapter 9, as we saw, this army is compared to a well-disciplined army, and some people have proposed that it's actually just like the Babylonian when they came to take Israel into deportation. God has used in the past armies like this, which are not necessarily called his people, but he uses them to punish his people, just like he has used Egypt or Assyria or Babylon in the past. He has used also the Greek army, the Roman army, to take Israel into captivities in their own countries, but at the same time, at times, they have been taken into deportation. And this, my friend, is announcing something of the like. A group of people, a certain group of people, we believe the Lord will be able to use in the near future to punish God's people because we have gone away from his words. We have gone away from his commandment, his statute, and his judgments. And this is not unusual in the Bible for God to raise an army of people, a great army, to punish his people. And he calls it his army. And he's allowing it. So around the test of the Sunday law, for those who are sealed, we believe that there will be protection. Because the fifth angel sounded, and those locusts are hurting only those who are not sealed. And this announced, of course, it's around the close of probation. And this is why some people have believed that the judgments are the same with the seventh trumpet as they are for the plagues. We still maintain that they are not. Until God's people are sealed, those judgment comes with mercy so that the inhabitant of the world will learn God's law. Now, as I go to the sixth angel to sound, verse 13 to 21 in Revelation 9. We saw now the fifth angel that seems to be long, but we need to study. We need to study, my friend. We need to read the Word of God. And I will read in your earrings, chapter 9, verse 13 to 21, the sixth trumpet. And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, Loose the four angels which are bound in the great river of Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the third part of man. You see, third part again, not three-third, third part, so which remains two-third. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them. 200,000, which is a kind of a binary language in the Bible. When it talks about 1,000 times 10,000, 10,000, it's simply binary mathematics where you need to take 10 and power 3 or power 5. In this case, it's 2 power 8. So that would be 200 million people. If you calculate 200 million people, so that's 2 multiplied by 10 power 8, and you will get 200 million people in binary language. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire, and of jacinth and brimstone. And the heads of the horses were the heads of lion, and out of their mouth issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these three was the third part of man killed by the fire, and by the smoke, and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth, and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents, and they had heads, and with them they do hurt. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the work of their hand, that they should not worship devils, and idols of gold, and silver, and brass, and stone, and of wood, which neither can see, nor hear, nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their theft. So that sixth trumpet that comes out of the angels in the Euphrates, the angel in the Euphrates. Where do we find the Euphrates in the Bible? And keep in mind, we're still talking about that army of Joel 2 as well. These are coming together, and they're basically describing pretty well the same. Their tail, which is like unto serpent, where into the fifth trumpet, it talks about the tail like unto scorpion, and they sting with their tail. They're very similar army. But the first time we hear about the river Euphrates is not in the book of Daniel by Babylon. It's actually in the book of Genesis chapter 2. In the book of Genesis chapter 2, we are told that there is a river that comes out of Eden, and that river becomes 4 heads. It divides and it becomes 4 heads. The first one is Pison, which compassed the whole land of Avila where there is gold. The second one is actually Gihon, which compasses the whole land of Ethiopia. The third river is Iddekel, which is towards the east of Assyria. And the fourth river is Euphrates. Now, Gihon, we know about it because that's where we talk about it in the sanctuary, where the laver was set up on that river of water that's called, it's basically a river of life. It has like a jet, like it's like a geyser, and the laver was actually set up in Jerusalem on Gihon, and that's where some of the king have been also anointed, was by Gihon. Also we have, of course, Iddekel, which we heard about when we studied Daniel. Daniel had vision by the river Ulai and Iddekel, which has to do with chapter 10, 11, and 12. If you read chapter 10, verse 4, I was by the side of the great river, which is Iddekel. Iddekel would have been around where Babylon was, which is in the region of Kuwait today, and Iraq. This is in the Middle East. And of course, Euphrates is also mentioned because that's how the Medo-Persian were able to take Babylon captive, was by simply drying out the Euphrates. So the Euphrates is in the book of Daniel as well as in the book of Revelation, which is no coincidence because the two complement each other. Those two books complement each other as we saw earlier. So here I have the sixth angel, and we have the river Euphrates again that is mentioned, and many people would like to think that this language is all spiritual, but do not forget the two poles of truth. The Bible is written from a spiritual and a physical, from a abstract and a concrete. So whenever you study the Bible, you need to study the two poles of truth. And if you don't know those two poles of truth, you better study them. I have them actually on my website in the appendix. So if you want to check www.numbers1317.org, you will find out in the appendix the study on these important studies. The two poles of truths. You can also study the your birthright, your priesthood. You need to know all this. It's very important. As we go now to the seventh angel, Revelation 11, so we have a bit of an interlude here. We leave chapter 10 for the moment and we go to Revelation 11, verse 15 to 19. And we know there that there is an important revelation because we know that the most holy place is opening up. And I read, the seventh trumpet, the triumph of God. And the seventh angel sounded, and there was great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And the 24 elders which sat before God on their seats fell upon their faces and worshipped God, saying, we give thee thanks, O Lord God Almighty, which art and was and art to come, because you have taken to thee thy great power and had reigned. And the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that you should give reward unto thy servants the prophet, and to the saints, and them that fear thy name, small and great, and should destroy them which destroy the earth. And the temple of God was open in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament, and there were lightning, and voices, and thundering, and an earthquake, and great hail. Now keep in mind that when we started studying the seventh trumpet, we are the scene, those are heavenly scene, of course, they're visions that John sees. In chapter 8, I remind you, verse 2 and 3 and 4, that the angel was right beside the altar of incense, which is situated in the holy place. And there was still some intercession going on with the prayer of the saints, mingling, of course, with the prayer of Christ, the intercession of Christ. And now, in the seventh trumpet, we see the temple of God opening, and the ark of the covenant is seen, because now the scene is passed from the work of the holy place, which Christ took when he went to heaven after his ascension, after he resurrected, after his crucifixion, and now Christ is interceding now in the most holy place according to chapter 11. And we know this is so because of verse 1 of chapter 11 and the measuring of the temple. Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar in them that worship therein. You see, so this is the measuring of God's people only, and them that worship therein. We saw the altar before the Ark of the Covenant, which is the altar of incense in the holy place. And then the angel is told, but the court which is without the temple, leave out, measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentile. And the holy city shall they tread on the foot 42 months. That measuring of this temple has to do with the work in the most holy place, just like it says. I'm not inventing it. It says it very clearly in verse 18 of chapter 11 of Revelation. The time of the dead that should be judged, and to those should give reward unto thy servant. You give reward to the prophet, to the saints. So those who are dead are being judged now. And as soon as the Sunday law is declared in the United States and changed into an international Sunday law, this is the test for the people living upon the earth at that time. And we know then that the probation is about ready to close. So when I look at the seals and all of this that we have studied so far, we have looked at the sixth trumpet now. The sixth trumpet was the third part of the men that were killed. And I was proposing, I forgot to mention it, my study of the 2017 chart of Daniel. We are proposing there that it points to Islam and the Caliphate. That great army is not an army of Chinese people like people have proposed. It's an army actually that we believe will rise when Islam and the Caliphate is fully established and God's people will be basically going through a punishment. As I mentioned in the book of Joel, God has used other nations in the past, not necessarily his people, but he has used them to punish God's people. And in this seventh trumpet, we see that the temple is open, the Ark of the Covenant is seen, and very soon the judgment will pass to the living, and then the probation will close. This is the appendix of the links where we get the information that we gave you regarding, for example, the trees that are being extinguished by fire right now, how the ocean has been affected by the spills of oil and tankers and pollution. It also talks about basically what's happening with Chernobyl, how it is not finished with Chernobyl nor Fukushima, and the nuclear catastrophe that occurred in those two different areas of the world, one in Japan and one in Russia. Chernobyl is in actually Ukraine, and Fukushima is in Japan. And of course, the destruction of Lake Baikal, which is to me a catastrophe. I think you need to study that carefully, how the sponge are dying and in different area of the lake, and that is destroying the ecology. And of course, we are not aware as Christian as we should of that 200 million men army, which definitely is preparing itself to march in Israel and also taking over the world. History repeating itself. Islam has attempted in the past, during the Dark Ages, to take over Europe, and they had covered a lot of areas of the world at the time. And now, just like in the army of locusts in the book of Joel, they are moving forward because God is allowing it. God is allowing it. Also, I have an interesting link of the discovery of the Ark of the Covenant, and many people have not accepted that discovery. I personally have accepted it, and the gentleman who discovered it has passed away now, but I used to follow him while he was alive. I was able to speak with him, and I believe he was very genuine. And though some people claim he was not really an archaeologist with his degree, I like to remind you that neither was the young shepherd who discovered the Dead Sea Scroll. He was just a shepherd, and yet God allowed him to find the Dead Sea Scroll in those caves. So you don't need a diploma and a PhD when God opens the way for you to do some discovery of the Bible. I encourage you to read and follow up with those links because they will give you an insight to how right now, not to be negative, but you can see that they're very updated links. Some are from the month of July 2017, and some are in the month of March, but they're not old links. And they are definitely showing that scientists are very concerned, and they are expressing those concerns, from the forest to the fishes to the animals that are suffering extinction because of all the catastrophe, because of all the woes that those trumpets are working on right now on the earth to give us signal of judgments sure to come. And when the seal of the living God is placed on God's people, which are alive, not the dead are being sealed while they are being judged while they're sleeping, and they will come out with the incorruptible body and receive the mind of Christ while they're sleeping, but the righteous living will go through the test of the Sunday law, and then once they're sealed on their foreheads, which is not a seal that can be seen, it's a settling into the truth, both intellectually and spiritually, then we know that probation will close, and then we will be facing the 7 plagues.